Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here, welcome back to the railway and welcome back to another review. Today I've finally gotten my hands on one of Hornby's brand new 2MT locomotives and it cost me an absolute fortune, so I'm really hoping this is going to be a good one. Today's model was announced what feels like an eternity ago. It truly has taken Hornby ages to get this one out, and I suspect that other Hornby projects have taken priority over this one, and perhaps this has been pushed back a couple of times. But anyway, at the end of 2023, the model was finally released, except that was the BR Black version, and I'd ordered the BR Green version, so I was left still waiting. But here we are for the first review of 2024, and I have this. Hornby's brand new BR Standard Class 2 in the BR Green. And it's been very difficult, but I have successfully managed to avoid looking at any reviews of this loco to date, so this truly will be my very first experience of it. High expectations because of the high price. The RRP for this on Hornby's website is £217.99, and I bought this from the Model Centre for a discount of 10% at £196.19. And if you'd like to pick up one of these for yourself, I do have an affiliate link in the description for you from Derail's Models. Now this does seem quite expensive for a small tender locomotive. Even with the 10% discount, this is still some £30 more expensive than the Acura Scale Manor class, which was a high quality loco with a die-cast body and a much larger loco at that. So what is this new 2MT like? Let's open it up and let's see. And right off the bat, as you can see, this does not come in Hornby's latest packaging. Hornby's newer boxes are much larger than this and they have much more cushioning on the inside. However, I don't think that Hornby have deliberately taken a step back with this. I suspect it's just because this model has been in development for so long that this was all sort of finalised before the new packaging was designed. But it does beg the question whether the model itself is a bit outdated for the same reasons. Hopefully not, but we will see. Anyway, let me show you the end of the box. So the version I have is R3839. It is the late BR version of the Standard Class 2MT 260, number 78000. And there are lots of different liveries available for this. I've gone for the BR Green unlined for a change, but they've also got BR Black and there's also a BR Green with lining as well. Quite a bit of choice. Anyway, if I show you the back of the box, you can see this is a 2MT, and there's a brief history of the 2MT just there, so you can read that if you like. And then on the end of the box, we have Hornby's drawing of the 2MT, which is dated 2019. That is 5 years ago, folks. Again, that just goes to show how long this model has taken to get released. But it's here now, so let's open up the box for the first time, and let's see what this is like. Ugh. Well, first of all, the loco looks a little bit lighter than it does on the front of the box. Hopefully the camera will translate that. So yeah, it's quite a light green despite what the box appears to show, but I think the loco in the box looks better, doesn't it? Alright, let's pull this out, see what this is like. I have heard that these have die-cast bodies. I don't know what proportion of the body is die-cast, whether it's the whole thing or just the boiler. So that's one thing I'm interested in. But let's take a look at the instructions first of all. So this is for the Standard Class 2MT. Let's open it up. So where to lubricate. So yeah, the axles and the crank pins. You have got some accessories to fit, including what looks like a snowplow, which is interesting. I don't think I've ever seen a 2MT with a snowplow before, so that's news to me. Connecting and disconnecting the loco and tender. Yeah, we've got the outdated drawbar design there with the plug. Obviously, some of Hornby's newer locos have had a push-together solution, but this has gone back to the old one. And then again, yeah, DCC ready. Looks like it's showing an 8-pin DCC socket there. Again, most of Hornby's new models now have a 21-pin socket. So yeah, this is looking quite outdated, which is the big downside of taking so long to get a model out if you keep pushing it back. Anyway, brake rods, yep, you can see the brake rigging there. You can fit that to the loco and to the tender. So with that, let's get this open and let's take a look at the accessories to start with. And there's quite a hefty bag full here actually, so let's take a look at that. So there's the brake rigging as promised. We've got buffer beam details, including a NEM coupling, which I assume you can put on the front. We've got steps and painted cylinder drain cocks as well, which you can fit if you like. And not to forget, of course, the snowplow here, which is a really interesting looking piece. Almost quite tempted to give that a try, but maybe later. Right, let's take a look at the loco then. First question, what is the finish like? Let's see. Ooh, really quite lovely, actually. It's a very rich green, which is good because a few of Hornby's BR green locos have looked a little bit washed out on occasion, whereas this one is quite a rich colour. I quite like that. Is the boiler die cast? Yeah, seems to be. So, expensive model. First impressions are that this is a quality model. That's good to see. Right, let's lift it up and let's see what we're dealing with here. So here it is, the Hornby 2MT, and the weight of this does seem to be pretty good. And the reason is that as well as the boiler being die-cast, we've also got a die-cast running plate and a die-cast smoke box as well. So for the loco size, it does seem decently heavy. But besides that, look at the complexity of this loco. Look at all the pipe work, which has been separately fitted and separately painted. Tons and tons of detail on this. I've certainly never seen a 2MT model with this level of detail, and that's before I've even had a chance to look at some of the intricacies. So it looks awesome. We are of course going to take a much closer look at this loco and some of its features in a second, but first of all, here's a bit of background on the 2MT in real life. The BR Standard Class 2MT was introduced in 1952 to the design of Robert Riddles as part of the British Railways series of standard locomotives, which was an effort to reduce the number of different designs of steam locomotive running on the network, which would simplify maintenance and cut costs. British Railways came up with 12 different designs, ranging from the Class 2 to the Class 9, 2 denoting the weakest and 9 the strongest. The Class 2 then was one of the smallest locomotives in the programme, and it weighed in at just 50 tonnes. Like many of the BR standards, the Class 2 was based on an LMS design, the IVAC Class 2, but with a few modifications to allow it to use standard parts. It had a different chimney and a smaller cab which allowed it to fit the loading gauge. 65 were built in total between 1952 and 1956, but they were vastly outnumbered by the IVAC Class 2, of which 128 were built. The series of BR standard steam locomotives was short-lived though. British Railways' modernisation plan was beginning to take shape just a couple of years after the Class 2 was introduced, and this plan involved replacing the fleet of steam locomotives with diesel ones. This process took a few years, and all of the Class 2s remained in service until 1963. But by 1967, all examples had been withdrawn, merely 11 years after the class had finished being built. To date, there are 3 preserved, while the rest have sadly been scrapped. So there she is, up close and personal for you, Hornby's brand new Standard Class 2 tender locomotive. And I am very, very excited, folks, because these days to spend £200 on a model and receive a loco that is actually worth the money is a very rare and delightful thing indeed. Yet that is exactly what we've got here. Yes, Hornby have charged £200 odd for this thing, but instead of producing a basic model with the bare minimum in terms of quality and detail and then just running off with the rest of the money, as some manufacturers do, you can really tell that Hornby have done everything they can to make this model as excellent as possible. And they really, really have. Let's start taking a look at this. So the decoration, despite not being a lined version of this model, is actually very complex. You've got the usual, such as the painted running number on the side of the cab, as well as the classification, which is nicely painted. And you've got the builder's plate on the front of the loco there, which is a nice print. And you've also got the buffer beam, which is painted as well. Those are all fairly standard, but you've also got an awful lot of other painted components. Look at all of the pipe work here. This has all been very carefully picked out. Most of the pipe work on the model is separately fitted, but some of it is just a part of the moulding, but they've got the right balance, I think, between moulded and separately fitted details so that the model looks great without being too complicated and too fragile to handle. So I think that's great. And the die-cast body produces a really gorgeous finish as well. Beautiful satin sheen on this. And pipework is a real topic on this loco because there is an awful lot. When you see this level of complexity on a model, it hurts a little bit less to pay £200 for it. Just look at all of this stuff, and it's all excellently fitted as well. That's the other thing. No visible glue despite an incredible number of separately fitted parts. But we'll talk more about the details in just a second. Up next, let's talk about the construction. So the loco is more or less entirely made of metal, chassis and body, and it comes in at 299 grams, which I think for a small tender engine is really quite impressive. That's more than the Bachmann 2MT, even though that's an IVAT I think, but still more nevertheless, and it's even more than a Bachmann 7F, which is a much larger loco. Now, did the loco body need to be die-cast? Well, not really. I think if a plastic body would have made the model meaningfully cheaper, then I might have advocated for that. But since it was £200, I'm very glad indeed to see the die-cast body, and it really does give it that feel of quality, which is great. I've heard it said that die-cast components suffer in terms of the crispness of the moulding, and yet I'm looking at some very crisp detailing here on the loco body. So I'm pleased to say, at least on this model, that does not appear to be the case. Right, let's take a look at some of the various details then. So we'll start at the front where we've got metal buffers which are sprung. There you go, sprung buffers, obviously. We do have a coupling hook fitted to the buffer beam, although there are no couplings to fit to those. I think that's one slight downside. Would have been nice to have something like that. We've got separately fitted lamp brackets on the running plate, which are good and straight with no visible glue. And we've got a very nicely detailed smoke box door, which is very small, which it should be, of course, on the 2MT. Yet there's a lot of detail here. We've got this separate number board by the looks of it. We've got handrails, lamp brackets, and a very, very fine smoke box door handle. And then beneath the smoke box door, we have lots of separately fitted pipework, which is all painted. The boiler itself is fully realistic all the way around. You can see right underneath it, which is great. What a wonderful bit of design that is, and there is even some detail between the frames, which is cool. You can also see that the dome here is not a separately fitted part, and that means that the join between the dome and the rest of the body is, well, non-existent. It's perfectly realistic as it should be, not something that we always see. And even though the chimney is a separately fitted part, it's a very, very tight fit, which is something that Hornby always seem to do well. Look at the wheels and the coupling and connecting rods. This is another area that Hornby excel in. We've got realistic looking wheels with realistic axles as well, and then all of the valve gear, coupling and connecting rods are very, very nicely represented here. Cannot wait to see these up and running. We've also got the speedo assembly, which is very finely modelled. Look at this area in front of the cab. We've got tons of pipework here. The safety valves, I think, are made of metal, but they've been painted, so they do lose that shiny metallic finish, but they at least match the whistle and the rest of the pipework, which I guess is a small plus. You've got nice flush glazing with painted window frames on the front of the cab, and you've also got the posable vent on top of the cab, which looks good too. Inside, the cab is fully detailed. Even the gauges have paintwork on them. That looks fantastic. And a lot of the pipework and such has been picked out as well. Can't quite tell from where I'm sitting whether this is going to have a firebox flicker. My intuition tells me maybe not, because this model was designed by the looks of it so long ago. And that would be a pity given how expensive this was, but we'll see later on. Don't think it would be a deal breaker though. Truly everywhere you look on this model there are separate details, and many of them are made of metal as well. These handrails are made of metal, which makes them nice and sturdy, and generally the whole model is good and solid as well. There are one or two small downsides, and that is visible flashing on a few of the separate components, which does break the illusion very slightly. And I also swear that this running plate is slightly warped. I can't hold a ruler up to it because there's too much detail on top of the running plate, but it does appear to bow up very slightly at the front end. Obviously that's no good, but it's also very slight, and I spent a long time looking at it trying to figure out whether it was warped or not. So it's not ideal, but it's also not terribly noticeable. Do let me know what you think. Let's take a look at the tender then, which is one of those interesting tenders which marries up to the cab. So the tender itself has the sort of back of the cab on it, I guess, with these bars in front of the glazing, which is really nicely achieved. And also the finish on the tender is quality as well. It does seem to match the loco too, which is good, even though they're made of different materials, tender body being plastic. And then you've got the late British Railways crest, which is nicely printed onto the side of the tender. In terms of decoration, you've got the underframe, which is in a matte black, and the axle boxes have been picked out as well. And as you can see, there's lots of moulded detail down here. And as a new tooled model, all of the detail here is nice and crisp, which looks great. Lots of detail on the front of the tender as well, which is really good to see. And then you've also got the coal load here. I'm not sure if this is removable. I suspect it probably will be, but it is quite a tight fit in there, so I'm not going to try and pull it out. The tender also has separately fitted wire handrails in a number of different locations, and the ladder on the back is of course separately fitted as well, which is good to see. Around the back there is more printed detail. We've got lamp brackets, which I think are part of the moulding, but again the moulding here is so crisp that you can't really tell. And then you've got more sprung buffers, which is a quality feature, and the rear coupling is pre-fitted and it has a slight pivoting on it. So there you go, what a lot of wonderful detail and features this model has. And it's all been assembled so carefully and with such quality that honestly it doesn't feel like too much to pay £200 for this. Yes, that is £30 more than the Acura Scale Manor cost, but when you look at this thing, I would say it's possibly a more complex model than that in terms of the number of separate parts. It doesn't have the visible glue on it that the Acura Scale Manor had, and I think there's a good chance that it will be a better runner as well. So I think with that we need to get this down onto the track, we need to take a look at the mechanism and obviously do that first performance test. Very, very excited to see this run. Let's give that a try. So there she is, Hornby's beautiful, beautiful new 2MT down onto the track, and I've already filmed the initial performance test and I'll show you the footage from that in just a moment. But after that I went on and looked at the mechanism and I'm going to talk about that now. Now the second I saw the box that this loco came in and I saw that this was the older Hornby packaging, it made me wonder, is this loco going to be up to date? Is it going to have Hornby's latest features in it? Or is it going to be more like a Hornby 2021 loco, which is when this loco would have released if the development cycle had have taken 2 years as is standard rather than the 5 that it actually took. And while the loco looks bang up to date in its finish and its details, inside it does seem as though this loco has not received the benefit of Hornby's recent innovations. But let's get into this. It doesn't appear to have any tender pickups, but it does. It's just the pickups touch the tops of the wheels so you can't see them. So in addition to the loco's driving wheel pickups, we actually have 6 pickups per rail, which is almost all of the wheels, so it's really going to be nice and reliable. As the instructions showed though, it does have the old-fashioned drawbar with the wires dangling free. It doesn't have the new Hornby drawbar design that we saw on the P2. Now I don't mind this too much, I mean it's a robust solution, but I have to say I do prefer the newer design, and I think it's a pity that Hornby didn't implement that on this loco. The base keeper is fully removable, it has 3 screws and there's no need to remove the front pony, and as you can see, because it is connected by pogo pin contacts, you can remove the base completely so that you can clean the pickups and also access the bearings for lubrication, and as you can see these are separately fitted, which is a great quality touch. It just has the one driven axle, so it's nice and simple, no real over-engineering here, which is good to see. The body removal is reasonably straightforward as well. 2 screws do this, and you can ignore the speedo because that's attached to the chassis and not the body, which is great thinking, I like that. The body is a tight fit and I had to go and sort of take it off camera to get the body off, but it came off in the end, and you can see we have this die-cast chassis, which is quite a neat and tidy looking thing. Now I have to say this is not a great choice of motor in my opinion. It is a 5-pole motor, but it appears to be the same one as was in the dodgy H-Class, you know, the one that failed 3 times before I eventually replaced it with a coreless motor. So I'm not sure why Hornby have done this to themselves again. I assume they probably chose this motor because it's quite a tight boiler, but then why not just use a coreless motor? Those are so much better than these. And spoiler alert, sure enough, the performance is about as sluggish as I'd expect from a loco with this motor. And when I get fed up of that, I'll probably try and replace this with a coreless motor. It does have a flywheel though, which has been balanced, as you can see. They've drilled out little bits of the brass there to try and balance it, so that's pretty good. There is no lighting though. This is the firebox area, nothing like that. Again, 2021 features here, not 2024. The tender body is held on with 2 screws and the body comes off quite easily. Here is an 8-pin DCC socket as the instructions suggested. Yeah, again, quite outdated. Most of Hornby's new locos come with 21-pin sockets and they have now for the last year or so. Here we've got the 8-pin. And there is space for a speaker inside the tender, but none is fitted. For a £200 loco, I think that is a little bit of a pity. So there's a number of features here that are not bang up to date. The back-to-back gauging on the loco is a little bit inconsistent as well. I got readings between 14.1mm and 14.4, so not quite as consistent as they usually are from Hornby, but none of these readings I expect will cause any major problems. So overall, it is a good quality mechanism. It's got some decent features, but some of them are a little bit under par, and I think for me the biggest issue is the motor. I've had a lot of bad experiences with that motor, and so I'm not as excited about this loco as I was. Having said that, there are locos that use this motor that are not problematic. I think the J15 uses it, not had a problem with that. But anyway, let's jump back in time and let me show you that performance test. Okay, moment of truth then. This thing looks like a £200 locomotive, but does it run like one? Well, does it run at all? That's the first question. So forwards direction, and let's give it some juice. It does. And wow, what a start that was. What a gentle, gentle start. Alright, so as you know, it has not been running at this point. This really is its first run, so obviously things might change as it runs on, but for now that looks pretty good. It does seem quite slow. That's 50% speed there. Yeah, so it's controlled. It's certainly not a fast loco. Hopefully that isn't due to some lack of torque though. I'll check that in just a second. What is the full speed like? Can it go a little bit faster if it wants to? Let's see. Yeah, quite a bit faster actually. And the other thing I'm noticing is the flywheel effect. If I cut it out in front of you now, you see it doesn't stop dead, so I would say there is quite a hefty flywheel in there, which is reasonably impressive actually because, well, the boiler's quite a slim one. There we go. Right, does the loco have any torque to it? That's a big question. So fingers in front of the buffers, let's go up to 50% speed. No. Oh dear. Have they used one of those disappointing motors again then? Well, it looks like it. There's no torque there for now. It may improve as it runs in, but yeah, I'll be surprised if this doesn't slow down around the second radius. Alright, well that's fine. What's the crawl like then? Now that it's fresh out of the box. Obviously I'll test all of this again later on, but for now let's have a look. Let's just ease it up. Oh, incredible. So it's capable of really, really good crawling. That is amazing. So smoothness seems to be great, the crawl is great, the control at the slow speed is great. Those are the good things. The downsides at the moment are the torque. Quite a serious lack of torque here at the moment, and I do wonder whether that's partially the reason for the slow running, because that again is 50% speed. But that's only for now. Let's get this thing running, let's see how it handles the track, and let's see if it speeds up or increases its torque the more it runs. So let's go for 50, let's see how we get on. Alright, so the slow running may not be a problem at all, you know, as long as it's not happening due to a lack of torque, then that's fine. Second radius. Yeah, actually, I will apologise for that because it did not slow down around that second radius, which is pretty good. Will it do so with a load? I expect so, yes, if it doesn't improve at least during its running in. But without a load, running light, it is perfectly smooth. It's handling the track beautifully, really does look excellent. Can't see any lighting inside the firebox, so no, there is no lighting in this thing, which I think is a shame. You know, this is a £200 loco. We've got other locos out there which are cheaper than this and larger than this and heavier than this, which do have that feature. So really at £200, it's not ideal for this loco to be missing any features. But at least it's detailed, at least it looks good, and at least the performance is at the very least decent. But I'll leave it there for now. I'll let this run in, and then I'll come back to you after an hour or so once this is fully run in. So stay tuned, I'll see you very shortly. Alright folks, that is running in complete, and it went quite well in that the loco never actually cut out or derailed or anything like that. It is nice and sure-footed, just like the real things were, funnily enough. But yeah, the torque issues have not cleared up, and in fact on that second radius curves I did catch it slowing down quite a bit occasionally. So sluggish motor. What's the torque like in the motor now? Let me hit it with 50% speed. Yeah. Almost can't move itself. Let's keep turning up. So it has to be at 70 before it's able to do that. Yeah, not a powerful loco. And you can see this as well. If I hit it with 50% power, as opposed to turning it up gently, you can see it takes it a good while to spin up. Now that suggests to me that this motor is really not powerful enough for this model. When a loco has a motor that I consider to be adequately powerful, you can hit it with power like that and it will start up at that speed. So yeah, not a powerful loco, and this does show through in the tractive effort of 0.3 newtons, which is a little bit less than I'd expect of a loco that weighs this much. That should be enough for 20 coaches or so, but bear in mind at that kind of load it is doing this. It's not able to turn its wheels properly. So yeah, a bit disappointing. The crawl, having said that, was awesome before. Is it still good now? Let's have a look. Yes, it is. It's amazing. And that is consistent with other locos that have this motor. The J15 is a top crawler, and while it still worked, my H-Class was a good crawler as well. There you go. You can accelerate quite smoothly as well. Let's try it in reverse, just as good. Yeah, look at that. Incredibly slow. Let's accelerate. Yeah, very nice. Alright, so I guess the dreaded pulling power test is here. I've set up some freight wagons. We've got a bit of a mixed train here. Open wagons, box vans, a few tankers, and there's a brake van on the back. Not a huge load. A load that I would say is fairly typical of a 2MT. A 2MT in real life would obviously make mincemeat of that. But let's see how this model gets on. Let's back it up and let's see how she gets on. Here we go. Let's test the couplings too. Okay, well, it's a good crawler, so I should have good control over this coupling. And I did. There we go, let's push it back. And now let's start it off with a load. Here we go. Let's try a nice gentle acceleration, which this loco is good at because there's no other way. There we go. And we are now at 50. Yeah, kind of slow for 50, isn't it? I'm now not sure whether that's intentional or just because of the weaker motor. But it's moving them, that's the main thing. And we'll catch up with that in a second and see how she gets on around the curves. Alright, and on the middle line I've got another 2MT. This is the Bachmann one. I believe this is the IVAT version, so it's not exactly the same loco, but it's kind of similar, except this model is far worse in every way. The mechanism is much poorer, it doesn't have the same level of detail, it has even fewer features if anything, and while the motor might just be a 3-pole motor, not the best motor in the world, it's not as underpowered as on the Hornby one, so this loco is still, you know, it's much more lively, can really get it going, and it doesn't slow down or struggle with loads or anything like that. And then on the inside line, I have the other 2MT that Hornby have produced. This one, I forget now when this dates back to, it could be the 70s or 80s. Whether this is an IVAT or a standard is unclear because obviously it's got virtually no detail on it. But it's still a more powerful runner. Look at this, 50% speed. It's acting as though my finger's not there at all. Look at that, it doesn't care. Off it goes. In fact, I'll slow it down because it's too fast otherwise. Much, much more powerful. And here we are in 2024, and this is a brand new release at 50% speed. And watch this. Ooh. Really struggling, which is such a pity because Hornby's latest releases before this had much better motors. There was a marked improvement. And so, while obviously if you own a 2MT and you're experiencing its lack of power, that's not ideal, I would hope that this is not going to be a broader issue for Hornby going forwards, because based on that date on the back of the box, 2019, it could be that this motor was chosen 5 years ago and it's because this loco took so long to release that it has released with this motor. I certainly haven't seen any other new Hornby locos release with this motor for quite some time. So obviously that makes it look a little bit better for Hornby, but you know, they still released a loco in this state, and because it took them so long to get this model out, they've actually ended up selling a model that is quite out of date even while it was brand new. So hopefully this is not something that we will see Hornby do going forwards. I think since they announced this 2MT, they've come out with a lot of other products, they've made lots of other announcements. Some of them they've had cause to rush through and produce before this 2MT, which has its positives for Hornby. They beat the competition, they got the Lion out before Rapido and whatever else. But now they're paying for it by having released a slightly out of date 2MT. Now, I'm focusing quite a bit on the downsides of this loco, and that's because they're such a shame because of how great this loco looked, but I'm not going to take away from what a fantastic looking model this is. The level of detail is mind-blowing on this thing. All of that pipe work, the marvellous finish, all of that good stuff. I don't want to forget all of that. And the quality as well, the die-cast construction, fantastic. But the motor does overshadow it, doesn't it? I mean, what's the point of a heavy die-cast loco if the motor is underpowered? It just undermines it. It would have run better if it was lighter, made of plastic, and a bit cheaper, frankly. So a coreless motor would have fixed this problem, and in fact in a future video I will probably replace this with a coreless motor and prove that to you. I'm that confident. But yeah, it's alright, it is handling this load. On DCC it may be a little bit better because you won't experience as many losses across the track as I am doing here on analog. So if you are a DCC user, you might not see any of this sluggishness. Even if you're on analog, you might not, because different motors perform differently. But of course, for my review, I can only go on my example, and this is how mine runs. And just for comparison, here's the much older Hornby 2MT, hauling the same load on the same setting on the controller, and you can clearly see how much more lively this loco is. Loads more power and no slowing down around the curves. And I do this because obviously my track's on the floor. Some people would rightly question whether it's my setup that's to blame for the poor performance. Well, hopefully this demonstrates that that is not the case. The real question is, what is it about some of these modern motors that makes them so pants, and that makes these much older 40, 50-year-old models more powerful than them? I don't know, but we've seen quite a few models like this, haven't we? Particularly from Hornby. So hopefully that's something that they can address for future models. But there you go anyway, beautiful model, not quite as good as I thought it was going to be during the first half of the video, but it certainly has its good points, and even aspects of its performance are really impressive. That crawl was very good indeed. So there you have it, Hornby's brand new 2MT. And now for some ratings on Hornby's brand new BR Standard Class 2MT. And as you can see, the scores here are a bit of a mixed bunch. In terms of the detail though, I really have very few complaints. I've given it 4.5 stars. Fantastic finish, faultless paintwork, tons and tons of detail, all of that pipe work, incredible, very detailed cab, perfect glazing, no visible glue, really, really beautiful loco. It doesn't get the full 5 stars though because it doesn't have lighting, as most new Hornby locos do, and it also didn't come with any additional couplings for you to fit to the buffer beams. A premium £200 model should have had these features in my opinion. The performance I've given 4 star, maybe it deserves a little bit less than that, but I do have a separate category for pulling power, which is where this loco really falls down. So the performance itself is okay, the crawl is fantastic, and it is nice and smooth and reliable without cutting out on points and curves and such. It is a little bit sluggish though, it really doesn't handle a load that well, it does slow down on the second radius curves, and it takes quite a while sometimes to accelerate. Now obviously that's realistic, real trains do that, but I'd rather a model do that because that's the way I'm controlling it and not because it's underpowered. And speaking of pulling power, it's got a tractive effort of 0.3 newtons, which should be around 20 coaches on straight and level track. However, at that load the wheels have almost stopped turning. Not a very powerful loco this, possibly due to the choice of motor. The mechanism I've given 4 star. Yeah, generally it's a really good solid mechanism. It's got proper bearings, tons of pickups, decently serviceable, quite easy to get into the thing. Not that keen on the choice of motor though, so that's why it doesn't get the full 5-star. It's also got the old-fashioned drawbar design, no pre-fitted speaker, and a slightly outdated DCC socket. The quality though is a 4.5, almost a 5-star on quality here, because we've got the die-cast loco body, which adds so much to the quality. It's really perfectly painted, no splodges of paint out of place, no visible glue that I noticed either. It does, however, have a little bit of flashing on a few of the separate parts, and I'm pretty certain that there is a slight warping on the running plate. It is only slight, otherwise I would have knocked it down more, but overall I think the quality of the loco is really good. Value then, the RRP is £217.99 and I paid £196.19 for this from the model centre. Now, if this loco ran better and it had a few more modern features, I would have forgiven this thing costing £200, because it really is a tremendous looking model, one of the best looking models I've ever seen, I think. However, it doesn't run that great and it is missing those modern features inside, so it does have to get a 3-star from me, middle of the road. Not bad value, because obviously you do get a lot for your money, but I think for £200 a little bit more wouldn't have been too much to ask. Overall then, that is a score of 7.41 out of 10, or a grade of D. Yeah, it's a stunning looking locomotive, but it's shipped with dated features and a slightly poor motor, and so that's the best I can do. Into the new logbook then for 2024. It's a new year, so a new ranking, and this is in top place currently, but with some of the locos on the way this year, even from Hornby actually, I doubt that that's where it will stay. So that will just about do it for this review then, folks. Like all models, this has some good and bad. The good is definitely the level of detail and the presentation of this model. Absolutely fantastic. The bad is the lack of features, the lack of lighting, the lack of pre-fitted speakers. In that sense, it's a little bit old-fashioned. And of course, the other bad is the motor, which has led to this sluggish performance, in my opinion. But what do you think? Do you agree with that, or do you think I've been too harsh? Please do let me know down in the comments. And also, if you've got one of these 2MTs, please let me know, how does it run? Is it sluggish like this, or is it much more powerful? And whichever the case may be, are you running on analog or digital? I'd love to collect a bit more information about this. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very, very soon with some more reviews. Alright, cheers folks, you take care.